the St. Bernard's Catholic Church across the street. Catholic Church is on the southeast corner of East Avenue and College, Wissahickon. Across the street is the First United Methodist Church on the southwest corner. On the northwest corner is Gamage Funeral Home. The northeast corner is Gamage Funeral Home. On the northwest corner is the First Baptist Church of Cedartown. The bells are ringing right now. That bell is as old as the church. This is an exciting day in First Baptist Church. A lot of people come home today. There's Ray Thomas. Ladies is in their bush arbor here this morning.
Which way were you? I was going to go with Steve.
What'd you say?
I might need to borrow that tape and I'll get through.
If you see her,
Not for we all pretty.
Always here, playing the piano. Chief here, Indian Chief Steve Majors, old Parson, Terry Lindsay's a Parson. It's great. That's down on 10-yard branch under Bush Arbor.
This car too.
May I have your attention, please? We're glad to have such a good group this morning, but we need room for a few more people. So if you'd move, there's space in the pew that you're sitting in. If you'll move towards the center so more folks can come in and have a seat, we'd deeply appreciate it. We'd like to remind the ushers that there's more space in the balcony if they'd like to send some folks up there. But we have room down towards the front for those of you who are coming in. Thank you.
The scene that you see depicted on your lap represents our conception of what that bush arbor scene must have looked like. Our historian, Mrs. Lucy Hawkins, who wrote the Centennial History in 1835, tells us that there was an Indian there were settlers there, and that the preacher was there with his gun and his Bible. It has other historic significance for us as well, because in 1956, when the church was preparing to move from the Grace Street building down close to the Historic Society to this building, Mr. Clint Kimbrough wrote and directed a pageant of progress that depicted the history of our church up to that point. This was the first scene in that history. Mrs. Virginia Berry, Mrs. B.L. Moody were settlers in that first history, as they are today. Mr. Steve Major is our Indian, and Mr. Terry Lindsay is the preacher with his Bible and gun. In 150 years, this church has occupied 3 other buildings besides this one. The first church building was a rented building in the late 1830s. It was also used as a schoolhouse. That building is gone today, but the cemetery that was associated with it still exists near the end of Clyde Drive, over close to Liberty Street. In 1848, the church built its first sanctuary on a small hill on Main Street. It seems a little strange today to think of it as a kind of a country area, but apparently it was, with trees. The church had a cemetery. It had a belfry tower with a bell, which rang to summon people to church. Today, if you listen carefully, and if all goes well, about 12:30, you'll hear the same bell ring. The bell this time will be calling you for dinner, but I hope that when you hear it ring, you'll be aware of the sense of continuity, the history of our church, and the dedicated men and women who have brought the church this far. In 1892, the church moved into the sanctuary on Grace Street that some of you are familiar with. It was a red brick building, very unique architectural design with a number of idiosyncrasies of its own. It had stained glass windows. We used the picture of one of the stained glass windows in the history of the church that we've been talking about a lot. Perhaps as a result of the centennial celebration in 1935, a lot of people in the church renewed their commitment, became rededicated, and the church experienced a period of growth that they had not expected. There was a large revival in 1936. It was a citywide revival. The evangelist for the First Baptist Church was Dr. Roland Q. Level, who later became the superintendent of evangelism for the Southern Baptist Convention for the Home Mission Board and the president of New Orleans Baptist Seminary. The leader for the Presbyterian revival was Peter Marshall, who at that time was pastoring a church in Atlanta. His wife later wrote a book about him called A Man Called Peter, which was made into a movie. Other important revivals occurred, and dedicated ministers dedicated laymen worked to make this church grow so that it outgrew an education building that was built in 1926 with the expectation that it would be there for a long time and that it would accommodate the people for a long time. Many people began to work early to try to expand the facilities because it was obvious that we were outgrowing the facilities rather quickly. Dr. Walter Moore established the building fund. Then Dr. John McGinnis in 1947 helped the people to realize the need for dedicated commitment to a building fund, and the church began to put 50 to 60% of its income into a building fund. Two very important building fund drives helped the church to raise enough money to build this facility. One in 1951 raised $250,000. Another one, a little bit later in 1955, became also important. This particular building fund drive was very intensive and was important to the success of the building of the church. It also showed the dedication and the faith of the people of the church, because the church decided under Dr. Smith's leadership to go ahead in May of 1955 and break ground for a new facility before the building fund was even started in September. It was successful. As you know, the facility was built, and on June 10, 1956, a very excited congregation moved into this sanctuary and overflowed the sanctuary. We were very pleased to see the fruition of sacrifice, of dedication that helped to make all of this possible. Many of you here today remember all or part of the last 50 years. Your dedication brought us to this point, and we humbly thank you. Without that dedication, our church could not have moved forward. Many others of you are relative newcomers to our church, but you are important parts of our present and of our future. And we're also grateful for you and for your dedicated service. Others of you are here as guests and well-wishers, and we appreciate your support and your prayers for our church as we move forward into the future. This particular church does mean a lot to me because it is the church of my childhood and my teenage years. All these pastors are important to me. Dr. McGinnis baptized me in 1940. Joy of commitment that I had somehow forgotten and that I knew as a teenager. I pray that as all of us look forward to the next 50 years, that we can not only celebrate the day and the history of the church, but that we can consecrate ourselves so that we can have that greater future that our slogan suggests for us. Thank you.
Amen. May we join together in singing the first stanza of hymn.
Texas, and he kept getting little notes in the offering plate saying, I owe you $5, I owe you $15, I owe you $10. And it kind of worried him. He thought somebody was playing a prank. But finally, after several months, the guy turned in every dollar for every one of the IOUs. And he found out that the man was trying to estimate the value of his sermons, and he put all the money in there that he thought they were worth. the deacons at the first meeting, who cuts all this grass? Whose responsibility is it? One of those deacons with a kind of a dry voice says, Brother Jones, our former pastor, used to cut the grass. And the new preacher said, well, I've done talked to him, and he said he didn't want to mow it no more. Cecil Johnson was preaching down at Jekyll Island. One little girl at school said to another, we've got the smartest pastor you ever saw. He can just take any subject and preach an hour on it. The little girl that went to Cecil Church said, well, our pastor can preach an hour without any subject. It's very obvious that I don't have any subject. And Wayne Benefield is coming after me if I go very many minutes longer. I was very proud of Joann Starnes, Dr. Joann Starnes. When I baptized her back in the 50s, I didn't know what she was going to do. But I'm glad she's doing well. And proud of this scene over here. I wish I had a gun sometime when I'm in the ministry. I don't know what I would do with it. Louise and I are very delighted to be here today, and I'm glad for her to get some of the flavor of the history of the First Baptist Church in Cedartown. When I was pastor here those years, in the late 40s and early 50s, I did a lot of rabbit hunting, a lot of evangelistic work, and had a great time. We were looking forward to the day when this building would be built. About that time, I was called to the First Baptist Church in Tifton, Georgia. Town about the same size and wonderful people like the people here. I suppose that Cedartown and Reedsville, North Carolina, and Tifton, all three are about the same size cities. The First Baptist Church Tifton is a larger church than this. The First Baptist Church in Reedsville, North Carolina is considerably smaller. But the top quality citizens in those towns, like here in Cedartown, are all congregated in the First Baptist Church, the top leadership in practically all professions. It's a joy to work with people who have that kind of leadership ability. It's a joy to be here today. I pray God's continued blessing upon you as you look forward to the years ahead. Louise joins me, as I say, in extending best wishes to all of you. We appreciate the good leadership you have in your pastor and other staff members as you look forward to the years ahead. May God bless you.
Recognize a number of people. There are two special guests at this service that may not be with us at the 11 o'clock service that I wish to recognize. One is Sam Davis, who I believe has the longest tenure of any staff person who's ever served in this congregation. Sam Davis served for 35 years on the staff of this church. We would like to honor him and like to ask him if he would stand, please. Thank you. We have another special guest, Father Pat Bishop, pastor of St. Bernadette's. I started to say Baptist Church, St. Bernadette Catholic Church. As you are aware, they sent us a congratulatory note. I think I am safe in saying, in the 150-year history of this church, it is the largest congratulatory note we've ever received. It is about a 4x8 sign on the lawn of their church. We are delighted that Father Pat can be with us today.
he would stand, please. Our next guest is Dr. Hugh Smith. He served as pastor of this congregation from 1953 to 1966. Is that right? Dr. Smith, come in.
Two cannibals were talking, and the first one said to the second one, "Your sister sure makes good soup." The second cannibal said, "Yes, she does, but I sure do miss her." Well, it's 19 years ago this July since we left you, and we sure have missed you all in those 19 years. I was privileged to pastor this church during what surely was its most exciting period in the 150-year history. I was immediately preceded by Dr. Jim Wilkinson, who was the interim pastor for 14 months. He'd formerly been in Athens. Dr. Jim was a character with his pipe in his mouth and his gravelly voice. He hugged all the women, and he could talk to the men, and he did a lot for this church, probably as much as the average pastor could have done in five years. He was talking to Ms. Roundtree. Many of you remember Ms. Roundtree, how stately and dignified she was one day, and he gave her a big hug. She hugged him back. I said to Ms. Roundtree, "How come I don't get all these hugs?" She said, "You have to wait till your hair turns white." You notice how white my hair is? Dr. Jim was noted for his witty sayings. One of them was this, after we finally started our building. He said, "What Walter Moore couldn't do, what John McGinnis couldn't do, the Methodists did. They made the Baptist building." And sure enough, their building was as bad shape as ours, and they launched out and did their building, and that was an added incentive. Now, the Methodists were in bad shape. Their building was about to fall down. Dangerous to meet in it. Ours wasn't quite that dangerous, but plaster's falling from the wall and window lights out, not replaced, and they did all that on purpose to try to stimulate the congregation onto building. Now, they told me to speak the highlights of my ministry, and of course, the big highlight was the building program. I talked to John McGinnis when I was considering the pastor of this church. He said, one especially big problem, they're trying to put a $500,000 building on a postage stamp. Said it comes within 5 feet of the line on one side and to the sidewalk on 2 other sides and 20 feet on the back. And he said, if you can solve that problem and get a better location, you'll have a great ministry. Well, I set out to encourage the committee to try to find a new location or enlarge that one, and we were blocked here because we had a lot that we couldn't buy with the trailers. And we had a man come into the Sunday School Board, architectural part from Nashville, survey the community. And he said, this is the best location. Number 2 is the Richardson location over on East. And then he named 2 or 3 other possibilities. Well, we went after the Richardsons. Finally, they agreed to sell for $50,000. Henson Hall went through the ceiling. That was too much money. And then another member would sell us a lot for $2,000, another give us 2.5. We'd have over 8 acres and 500 feet frontage. And so I had to call Walter Moore in. Walter and Henderson very close. And he spoke to the committee. And Henderson asked to meet the next morning before Walter Moore left. Said, I want to have a prayer meeting. He said, I'm not used to praying. I want to pray. And he said, Lord, if I've been standing in the way of this building committee, forgive me. From now on, I'm cooperating 100%. Well, we had to make it. And we recommended to the church, ready to, and we did recommend to the church, we buy all of that, $52,000. And the Sunday before we were to vote, the Richardson called up and backed out. I'm just giving you a little background. It wasn't
easy as it sounds that Joann gave it to us. Then we backed up, square one. What were we to do? Well, we looked at the other locations, we looked at this, and finally the traders decided to sell for $32.5. Dick Buskirk's going to sell for $12. Well, you see, that got our sights raised, money-wise. That was less than we would pay over yonder. So the morning that Mr. Trader decided the deed, he backed out. What will we do, said Fred Brewster. So we figured this way. We could buy the Woodruff lot over here and move the building over, leave off the chapel, and hymn the Travers in, and when he died, well, he was old, it was his You can't blame him for not wanting to give it up. Then we'd build the chapel if we could get the lot in. He found out what we were going to do, and rather than be hemmed in with Baptists on all sides, he decided to stay. So then we recommended the church, went over without any opposition, and they said, have something done by January the 1st, put it out for bids. 559 T.C. Britton was the low bidder, and we accepted that. We broke ground in the spring, and we were on our way. Well, they wanted the building fund drive after we broke ground, because some people decided we never were going to build. So we brought in C. Roy Johnson, a professional fundraiser. Uh-oh, we had trouble. Leadership split. Not going to pay a man to raise money. But that was the trend in the 50s, and this man was successful, and Fred and Henderson were in favor of it. And so the church approved it, and he came in, rolled up his sleeves. He knew exactly what